Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Sekani, a podcast for people in their 20s who are trying to figure out life and not get lost along the way. Today's guest is Venchele an author, public health professional, editor, and founder of Mesite Hair Inc. With more than a decade of experience in public health and health equity, Venchele has dedicated her career to improving access to healthcare, empowering communities, and helping people build healthier, more fulfilling lives. She's also pursuing a doctorate in public health leadership and has written extensively on resilience, emotional intelligence, relationships, communications, and personal growth, including her book's journey to redemption and faith and why do I want to get married. Venture, welcome to Conversations with Sekani. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me on the show, Sekani.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, Venture. I want us to, begin with your 20s, right? So I'd like to ask, what kind of person were you during that season of your life, and what dreams were pursuing you?
So in my 20s, I would describe myself as ambitious, curious, and very focused on creating like a meaningful life for myself. So I knew in my 20s that I wanted to help people. I wanted to continue my education. Because at the time in my 20s, if I remember correctly, I just had my bachelor's. So I had not yet pursued like a master's degree, which didn't happen until I think 7 years later or 5 years later. And I also knew that I wanted to build a career that was connected to service, to public service, but I did not yet understand exactly what that would look like. Um, and so in terms of my dreams, like I was pursuing or I wanted to pursue professional success, but I was also learning who I was outside of my accomplishments and other people's expectations. And so looking back, my 20s were really, I guess, a season of exploration. I was learning about my strength. I was learning about my values and then the kind of impact that I wanted to make through public health, writing and community service.
Wow. Oh, all right. So looking back, what experiences during your 20s shaped the person and professional you've become today?
I guess my 20s, looking back on it, taught me about the importance of resilience and then being able to adapt to different situations and then continuing to move forward even when the path is not completely clear. Some of
Mm,
the experiences that shaped me the most were the transitions, the disappointments, and moments when I had to advocate for myself. And I think those experiences helped me to understand that growth is not always visible while it is happening. And it also made me more compassionate toward people who are trying to build their lives while managing circumstances that others may not see. And so professionally, I learned how important communication, education, and access to resources are. And personally, I learned that achievement is meaningful, but it cannot replace self-awareness. It cannot replace emotional health or a strong sense of purpose.
mm, wow. All right. And like you said, achievement is actually, meaningful, right? But it cannot replace a strong sense of purpose, right? So now I want us to touch on your career and mission, right? So public health, it affects every aspect of our lives. Yet many people don't fully understand its importance. So how would you explain public health to someone hearing about it for the first time?
Yes, and so these issues, I mean, throughout my career, I have focused on health equity, um, education, and community empowerment. And I think these issues are close to my heart because a person's health should not be determined by their income. It should not be determined by their neighborhood, their language, education, or ability to navigate a complicated system. And so I have seen how people can be surrounded by services and still struggle to access the help that they need because they do not have the right information, they don't have the support or the connections. And education really gives people, I guess, the language and knowledge to advocate for themselves. Health equity challenges, though, is a bit tricky because it does challenge us to examine why some communities consistently experience like worse outcomes than others, which is why community empowerment to me, at least it means to me that we don't simply enter communities and tell people what they need. I think there needs to be an emphasis on listening to them, building relationships, and then working alongside them. And I believe people should have a voice in the policies, programs, and decisions that affect their health and their lives.
Mm. All right. Wow. Oh, okay, thank you for that wonderful one, right? And yeah, many young adults today, we feel pressure to have life figured out by a certain age. So what would you say to someone who is still discovering their path?
I would tell them that you don't need to have your life figured out by a certain age. I know right now, where I am in my life, which I'm not going to do, I can't share what my age is. I always think I'm young, so I'm just going to leave it there. Um, but I would just say that I'm still figuring out life as we speak it right now. And I think that's always going to be an ongoing process. And discovering your path is not evidence that you're behind. I think sometimes this concept of us being behind is like a figment of our imagination because our timeline is never going to look like other people's timeline. The focus should really be becoming more of who you are and figuring
Mm,
out what you love and what you don't love, especially like, and not just in your 20s, just like throughout your lives, regardless of the transitions that you go through, whether you become a parent, whether you go back to school or you change jobs. Many of us, I think, are taught to view life as like a straight line. So, for example, I was always taught to, go to school, graduate, find the career path, the perfect career, build a relationship, achieve certain milestones, and then have everything sort of settled by a particular age. And now I'm even thinking to myself, was it what was communicated to me, or was it my interpretation of what was expected of me? And real life does not always unfold that way because your
mm,
path will include changes. It will include those transitions I mentioned earlier, pauses, disappointments, or unexpected opportunities on the path. And none of those things automatically mean that you have failed. That's why perhaps it is important to focus on learning yourself more, developing your skills, making decisions that align with your values rather than trying to meet people or other people's timeline. So you do not need to see the entire road. That's the whole point of this question, I think. You do not need to see the entire road. You just need to have enough clarity and courage to take the next meaningful steps. And that could mean talking to someone and mapping out a plan. But even then, it's important to take a step back and then allow the path to unfold the way that it needs to, right? Because not everything on this plan is going to be accomplished. And I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who has a type A personality. There will be detours, and I think that those detours are just as important for your growth and development and helping you realize that just because you don't get everything done on that list doesn't mean that you're not where you're supposed to be.
all right. Wow. Okay, so yes, thank you, Venchele. And I'd like to ask, right, in your experience, what role does emotional intelligence play in building healthy relationships, successful careers, and strong communities?
So emotional intelligence affects how we understand ourselves, communicate with others, and respond when situations become difficult. And I think in relationships, when we talk about healthy relationships, it's important to build self-awareness and to learn to listen, to learn to express our needs and wants, take accountability for our actions, because actions, sometimes I think people don't understand that our actions can lead to certain expectations from other people. And
Mm.
then I think also it may be important to make space for other people's experiences without immediately becoming defensive. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is that in order to build healthy relationships, successful careers, and strong communities, you have to be able to embrace another perspective, even when you cannot relate to it based on your lived experiences. And in our careers, it does help us manage conflict. Emotional intelligence helps us receive feedback, build self-awareness, lead in different environments and lead people with different personalities and different social and cultural backgrounds and still remain grounded under pressure. And within our communities, emotional intelligence allows people to move beyond simply proving that they are right and begin working toward understanding and shared solutions. It does not mean avoiding difficult conversations, because
Mm.
emotional intelligence to me doesn't mean that we're going to be emotionally avoidant and not have the tough conversation that we need to have in order to build sustainable futures, for ourselves and the people we love, or help them build sustainable futures for themselves. Um, and so to me, within communities, emotional intelligence is, it allows people to move beyond simply proving that they're right and helps them begin working toward understanding and towards some shared solutions. As I said, it means recognizing emotions, it means understanding what they're communicating and responding in a way that's thoughtful rather than reactive. And all of that, when we think about the underpinning, like knowledge may help us create a strategy, but emotional intelligence often determines whether people trust us enough to carry that strategy forward.
From our conversation today, what lesson would you want to, leave for the listeners about purpose, resilience, and creating a meaningful life?
So what would be, is it one of the questions you asked?
Right. Like, what would you want to be the takeaway of our conversation today? What would you want listeners to, learn from, what you've shared with us today?
Um, what would be the takeaway of the conversation? Let me think for a second,
Mm.
because we covered a lot of grounds today. But if I was talking to my 20-year-old self, um, I would just say, like, maybe the main takeaway that I want your audience to have is that your life doesn't have to unfold according to a perfect timeline for it to
Mm.
be meaningful. Because growth often happens through uncertainty, transition, setbacks, and always remain curious, right? Always have this
Mm.
willingness to keep learning about yourself and the world you live in. Be curious about the world that you live in. Whether we're talking about your careers, your health, relationships, communities, meaningful change really does begin with self-awareness, in my opinion. Um, it does begin when you have compassion for yourself and others. And and then make sure that you align yourself with people who are going to be patient with your growth and development. And
Mm.
so you don't
All
have to
right. Wow.
have,
So yes, thank you.
yes, and you don't have to have everything figured out today because as I said earlier, I'm still figuring out my life. Um, and so you can continue and you will continue to evolve and you will continue to make decisions that reflect your values and use those experiences to create a positive impact in the lives of others while making sure that you don't abandon yourself too. Because as much as I want everyone to have successful careers and to make positive impact and to make a positive impact in the world, you also need to make sure that you're taking good care of yourself as well.
Mm, all right. Wow. So yes, thank you, Venchele. This has been amazing. And
Thank you so much.
finally, before you go, where can listeners get to learn more about you and also connect with you?
So listeners can learn more about me by visiting my website at www.pathwaycoachwriting.com. They can also find me on LinkedIn, on all social media channels, and then also purchase the books like on Amazon.
Mm, all right. And yes, I'm gonna put the link in the show notes so it's easily accessible for listeners. And to my
Mm-hmm.
listeners, I want to say thanks for tuning in to Conversations with Sekani. If this episode sparked something in you, just as it did in me, make sure to share to someone you think might need this and also subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. Once again, thank you, Venchal. You have a wonderful day ahead.
Yes, thank you, Sakani, for having me on the show.